Oh, we've got good news, and then we've got the idiots who want to fearmonger about the bad news and say the sky is falling. Yes, we have it again about nuclear power. The safest, cheapest, most reliable form of power we have. And if you want to know about this site, thebulletin.org, all you need to know is they have that pseudoscientific doomsday clock on it. Yeah, these are the actual guys behind it, the Bulletin of the Atomic Sciences. We are 85 seconds to midnight. Ooh, it's going to happen anytime now, people. And this thing has been criticized and debunked all over the place, but it lets you know how seriously to take this site. Yes, here we have the Trump administration's reckless attack on radiation protection will have long-term consequences for public safety. People will die! Hey, let's get down into it. What are they talking about? They say regulations limiting doses from the radiation emitted by nuclear fissions and decays are based on the linear no-threshold model, or LNT. We've talked about this before. This is the model that says that any additional radiation exposure above the normal background levels increases your cancer risk, including every banana you eat and every family member you hug. This is not the scientific consensus. I don't know if most people go so far as to call it pseudoscience, but I would. Yeah, there's basically no evidence for it. The way it works is that you look at the dose response curve. When you have cancers that are attributable to radiation exposure, you look at how much exposure they had, and then the cancer, and who got the cancer and who didn't. But you can really only see those for big effects. Big doses, big exposures, showing you lots of cancers. You get that trend line, but you gotta pull the trend line back in to where it's the ones that are hard to count, like the very minimal doses. What are the cancer risks from that? Well, when you do it with the linear no-threshold model, you make an assumption, and the assumption is that that line crosses at the origin. So it makes sense if there's no radiation exposure, then there's going to be no cancer due to radiation exposure because there's none there. But the assumption is that's where it crosses, so any little bit above that is going to increase the risk. That is not the consensus. The scientific consensus is that there is a threshold. So there's a point above which additional radiation exposure gives you a cancer risk. And we'll talk about that. There's another model we've talked about in the past called hormesis, which actually says that below that threshold, there are health benefits to low radiation exposure. We'll talk a little more about that as we go through it. But keep in mind, it's one of those. It's not linear, no threshold. There is no scientific consensus for hormesis, but there's a growing literature supporting it. So he's talking about LNT. This hypothesis posits that irrespective of whether ionizing radiation comes in a pulse or over years, the additional risk of developing cancer as a result is proportional to the cumulative amount of energy deposited per gram of tissue. So if you get tiny amounts over a lifetime, it's exactly the same thing as getting it all in one big burst. Do you believe that? Really? Since 1975, and yes, the NRC is to blame for this, the U.S. nuclear industry has been required to limit exposures to workers and the public to a LARA as low as reasonably achievable. Yes, this is the precautionary principle cranked up to 11. We've talked about the precautionary principle and how self-contradictory it is, and it's just completely illogical, but sadly, it dominates a lot of the thought of regulators, and here the regulators have basically had full reign to go in as much nuclear panic as they want. What you do in most industries, when you're talking about general exposure, like the fluoride in water, or particles of stuff in the air, or the amount of stuff that you get in food that's potentially hazardous, when they're setting these limits, what they do in everything but the nuclear industry is that they look for the lowest amount that's ever been found to do any damage at all. And then just to be on the safe side, divide that by 10. So it's just going to be an order of magnitude safer, and that gives you a nice bit of leeway. But nope, not for nuclear. Nope, no additional radiation at all. And that's a big part of the reason why nuclear power just hasn't been able to get much of anywhere in the last several decades. In May 2025, 4 months after taking office, the Trump administration challenged this 5-decade-old regulatory approach. Good! He passed an executive order saying those models lack sound scientific basis, directing the NRC to reconsider reliance on LNT and ALARA, which is predicated on LNT. You get rid of LNT, you get rid of ALARA. And so what he talks about is that this is a campaign by advocates of the radiation hormesis theory, which posits that low doses of ionizing radiation actually protect against cancer by stimulating the body's DNA repair mechanism, the exact opposite of ALARA. He's doing a false dichotomy here. He's completely ignoring linear threshold. He's acting like the only two options are LNT and hormesis. No, there's linear threshold in there. On July 2, 2025, an anonymous NRC spokesperson enthused in a social media post that the executive order reforming the NRC gives us a chance to reconsider our radiation protection framework in support of the whole-of-government effort to safely enable the nation's use of nuclear power, and not be so damn obstructionist. Now, for this next part, I have no idea what he's talking about. He's mentioning, for instance, 2 rem per year. I looked at the links. I couldn't find that figure in there anywhere, and rem doesn't make any sense anyway. When you're talking about hazards to human beings, you want to measure it in sieverts, because that's what actually takes biological damage into account. I couldn't find this 2 rem per year anywhere in his sources. The source said 5 millisieverts per year, which is pretty much standard everywhere else. Like you've got radiologists, medical release, public exemptions, things like that. The normal exposure to the public or to people who take x-rays or whatever, 5 millisieverts per year. Now, if you want to know how safe that is, in some places like Ramsar, Iran, and even in some beaches in Brazil, that's the background radiation, if not more. So there are people who live their lives getting more radiation than that. You know what, let's take a look at that slide. This is from the presentation listed at the NRC. They talk about the proposed dose limit tiers. Tier 1 is a de minimis dose, that's 1 millisievert, or 0.1 rem and below. But the variation in background dose in the US is already more than 3, so. Tier 2 is the public action limit, that's 10 millisieverts or 1 rem. That's an optimization target instead of a hard initial limit. Tier 3 is the 2 rems he was talking about, that's actually 20 millisieverts. And that is the occupational action limit. And that's in line with the Department of Energy and international targets. And then the overall absolute limit is 50 millisieverts or 5 rems. Joint dose limits for public and workers. These recommendations are just as safe, work within the current scope of limits, and provide the ability to balance the benefits of the use of technologies, power, medicine, etc. Unless you want to fearmonger about nuclear power and go on and on about how we're all gonna die. So again, he's going back into his false dichotomy here with hormesis. Advocates of the theory of radiation hormesis do not believe the LNT hypothesis, neither does anyone else with a functioning brain. Radiation hormesis is a fringe theory. It is not fringe. It's not a consensus, but it's not fringe. With passionate adherents, here they're poisoning the well there, who are taking advantage of the Trump administration's skepticism about regulations of all types. Oh my God, their skepticism. Horrible skepticism. You know those skeptics with their skepto vibes messing everything up. One of the most vocal hormesis advocates is Edward Calabrese, an emeritus professor of toxicology at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. Oh, so he knows what he's talking about then. He argues that the evidence for LNT is based on scientific fraud and therefore should be replaced with a model that considers the possibility of no risk and even possible benefits from ionizing radiation below a certain dose. So either linear threshold or hormesis, the two of them together. He just told you there were two of them when he's been pretending otherwise. But the thing about it is these hormetic responses are very real. Cells can repair DNA. And they've got those repair systems, antioxidant systems, apoptosis. They kick into gear when that kind of damage is detected. And the people who do the radiation treatments for cancer patients know that. Because what they'll do is they'll hit you with a radiation treatment and then have you wait a week and then come in and hit you again. They're hitting with you little bits at a time. instead of trying to slam it in all at once. Even though according to these guys, it's all exactly the same. The medical community seems to know better. And the thing is, when you talk about these cell repair systems and things like that, the LNT advocates like this guy just stick their fingers in their ears and go, la 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 la. And by the way, hormetic responses are also confirmed in the lab as well. The research and reports Calabrese and his supporters are trying to discredit were done more than 50 years ago. Yeah, because that's how old it is. For decades, the largest human population studied for radiation effects was the survivors of the 1945 Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings who, depending on their proximity to the ground zeros, were exposed to whole body doses ranging from near zero to several grade delivered in a single burst. And what you show there clearly is that the low-dose survivors showed no increased cancer risk. But that's not good enough for him. He comes down here and he looks at this study called the INWORKS Study. They found like 310,000 nuclear industry workers and checked how many of them got cancer. And he went, "Oh, all these people got cancer, therefore any radiation is harmful." All right, first, they were counting the deaths where the underlying cause on the death certificate was cancer. That's what they looked at, all solid cancers combined. They didn't include leukemia, but they did cancers of all sorts of organs and tissues like lung, colon, pancreas, prostate, breast, but excluding blood cancers like leukemia and lymphoma. But they looked at all of these cancers combined, and they didn't sort out the ones that are associated with radiation. Like thyroid cancer is more heavily associated with radiation than colon cancer. Or there are different types of lung cancers, some of which are associated with radiation, others of which are heavily associated with smoking. They didn't compare nuclear workers to the general public, and they didn't account for those comorbidities like smoking. They tried to apply it all statistically, like statistically so many people smoked, but they didn't count it directly. And maybe something about plant workers, like their socioeconomic group or whatever, meant it was more likely that they smoked or had some other sort of exposure. They didn't look at any of that. And they looked at just mortality, not overall diagnoses. But not everyone who gets cancer dies from it. And by the way, just so you know, airline pilots get more radiation exposure than plant workers. People who live in Denver, Colorado get more radiation exposure than nuclear plant workers who work at sea level. There's all sorts of variations in the population about that additional radiation exposure. According to linear no threshold, they all should have increased cancer rates. Do they study them? Of course not. Here's a fact for you. Radiation workers of all kinds show lower cancer mortality than the general public. Explain that one. That isn't necessarily hormesis, but it does very strongly speak against LNT. Okay, now the horrible thing that's gonna kill us all. The Office of Nuclear Energy has been inviting startups promoting new design nuclear power reactors to build prototypes. At most, the startups will only be able to demonstrate that they have not had a serious accident or near miss within their first few years of operation before they hope to build their reactors in large numbers across the country and export them abroad. With this attitude, how would you ever get something new started? This is obstructionism. Every time you make a new car, oh, well, you can only prove that it didn't have accidents over the last year or two. That's crazy. That's crazy. Oh, check this out. The nuclear startups are under great economic pressure to cut safety and security requirements currently required by the NRC and other regulators around the world. No, it's not. That's an absolute lie. In fact, the kind of plants they're talking about making are far, far, far safer. They're just walk away safe. The worst thing happens, reactions stop, not because of clever engineering or because of highly trained personnel, but just because of the laws of physics. These reactors will be safe as long as the laws of physics remain as they are, which seems to be a safe bet. Costly requirements include containment buildings that prevent the release of radioactivity to the atmosphere in the case of a core meltdown accident. Do you have any evidence they're not going to build containment buildings? God, they're not Soviets. They're not socialists. The plans are to put it underground, which makes it even safer. And yes, you do surround it and cover it with concrete, but underground makes it even safer than the normal above-ground containment buildings that we have. Yeah, in between socialists and capitalists, one of these groups has a history of not building containment buildings, and it's not the capitalists. By putting the Energy Department, which is pouring billions of dollars into nuclear startups, first in line in safety regulation, the Trump administration has partially undone the 1974 decision of the post-Watergate Congress to separate safety regulation from nuclear power promotion by breaking up the Atomic Energy Commission to create the NRC and the Energy Department. Good! Needed to be done. Even before the Trump administration, under political pressure from the nuclear industry through congressional Republicans, ooh, evil Republicans, the NRC commissioners backed off by majority vote from requiring filtered vents for a set of U.S. reactors designed by General Electric that were clones of the Fukushima Daiichi reactors 1 through 3. Outright lie! Those at Fukushima were GE Mark I's. No one's making reactors that even remotely resemble them anymore. No one's making anything like that. I'm really surprised this guy didn't mention Chernobyl. You know, when he was talking about not having containment buildings, oh, like Chernobyl didn't have a containment building, but then he'd have to put the blame on socialists, I guess. Here's a fun fact. Chernobyl and Fukushima had no detectable increase in cancer rates in the general population, despite the predictions from Linear No Threshold. You did from the workers who were directly exposed to it and the people who were exposed to the known high levels. But when you're talking about the ones who got the minimal levels, the ones in like the surrounding area, none. Also funny how he didn't mention Unit 6 at Fukushima, which was a GE Mark II that had nothing wrong with it. They just shut it down, but it wasn't part of the disaster. He also didn't mention the Onagawa plant. I've mentioned this before. It was closer to the epicenter of the earthquake, got hit with a higher earthquake, got hit with a bigger tidal wave. No disaster. Perfectly safe. Despite the fact that the reactors were built in just 3.5 years. Reactors 2 and 3 were at least. And Reactor 2 has been started back up, and they're working on finally restarting Reactor 3. Reactor 1's going to be decommissioned, but it's an older reactor. It's only doing like 500 megawatts, and it's just really expensive to keep it going, given that's how much power you get. The others are putting out more than 800 watts each, so they're worth it. All right, let's finish this off. Just as it did with air pollution rules, the Trump administration has now, in effect, set the value of American lives to 0 and regulatory protections against nuclear radiation-caused cancer. The damage that will result from the evisceration of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission will not be immediate and may arguably turn out to be minor on the scale of the damage the Trump administration is doing in other policy areas. Oh, they're destroying the country from the top down. It's all going to come crumbling down. We're all going to die. But safety analysts and decision makers must keep track of the dismantlement of regulatory structures that have been built over generations. Hopefully, it will be possible to reconstruct some of them with improvements where possible. In the meantime, however, the attacks of the Trump administration on public safety must be exposed. He wants to kill us all. God. Nuclear fearmongers, I'm telling you. These people are just crazy. But hopefully we won't be listening to idiots like Frank von Hippel in the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, because it makes me cry when I think about where we could be now. If we had been building nuclear reactors this whole time we've been able to, not having been fully obstructed by the NRC, the beautiful new Generation 4 reactors that we can make now, having them go critical all over the country, all over the world. That's plentiful energy for everyone. Cheap, plentiful energy. And safe. Absolutely safe. Far safer than any other kind of power generation except maybe wind. It's like kind of on par with wind. It basically ties. Solar has deaths because you got when they don't include rooftop solar, then okay, maybe it's tied with nuclear, but nope, rooftop solar include that. well, people fall off roofs. That's a dangerous profession. But yeah, it is completely safe. It is the safest form of power that you could want. It is reliable. We can have it for a good solid base load. And if we had been doing that this whole time, we probably wouldn't be talking about global warming, because our CO2 emissions would probably be down next to nothing. There would have been much more of an incentive to make electric cars and get everyone in those by this point. And people would have had so much more energy to power so many more things. All of the energy we're going to be using in data centers, we already are using in data centers. These things, most of the apps you run on them, these little phones that we carry around, these pocket supercomputers, actually most of the stuff we use, most of these apps do not run on the phone itself. It runs on a data center somewhere, and it's using processing somewhere else. All of this needs power, and nuclear is the best way to get it. So hopefully we'll get new power plants going. Hopefully the next president won't undo it all, but we'll just have to wait and see. Thank you so very much for watching. Comments for the comment god, shares for the share throne. Please hit like, subscribe, and the bell. And one more thing you can do, and I think this is on a mobile thing, like you go down and you swipe left a couple of times and there's a button called hype. Apparently that also bumps up the video in the algorithms. I don't think you can do that on desktop. I think that's only on mobile, but please do that if you're watching this on mobile. And of course, regardless, donate.bogosity.tv keeps me doing this. One-time donations or regular support. Thank you so very much for watching. Until next time, stay strong and be free.